Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to my sewing room. I'm pretty excited today because it's week 2 in the Scrappiness is Happiness quilt along. And so last week we kicked it off with the Buzzy Bee. Okay, remember, so I had 3 of those blocks made. Only need 1 for the quilt, for the sampler quilt if you're doing it. But if you're doing the quilt, hopefully a lot of you have a hive sewn up by now. They're pretty simple. This week's block is pretty simple too. And what we're doing is the Calico Mushroom. And again, this is the book that we're working out of. So we've got the Calico Mushroom. This is a 12-inch finished block. And then this one comes in 2 sizes. And so I did a bunch of 6-inch blocks. And I'll be showing you how to do the 6-inch blocks today because they're sewn exactly the same as the 12. But I did a bunch of the 6-inch because, I mean, these are like potato chips. You just can't stop at one, right? And they're so simple to sew. And so I've done a bunch, and I'm going to sew 3 more today to show you because I want to make a mini quilt out of these little mushrooms. So I'm just going to show you what I have done so far. I'm not sure how many little 6-inch blocks that I'm going to be using, but they're so fast, like I say. And so let's open this real quick. And so Calico Mushrooms is on page right here, cutting instructions for the 6-inch, the 12-inch, on page 20 of the book. But here's the quilt right here, and you saw it in the, slideshow in the opening and stuff. But see how I have both sizes? I just thought it would be so cute just to take these little ones and make a cute little mini quilt. So I'm going to be doing that. And then speaking of the sampler quilt, I didn't have this printed off last week to show you, but this is the Scrappiness is Happiness quilt along. This is the sampler quilt that I designed. So this has got at least 1 of each block of the 32 blocks, and then the fat quarter flirt is on the back of the quilt along with the label. And so we already did the bee, which we only need 1 for that, but for this one we need a 12-inch block and a 6-inch block. So we need 1 large mushroom and 1 small for the sampler. Now I left a link last week for this. This is a free PDF download. This is the finishing instructions, of the quilt and all the yardage and everything that you need. And so I'll leave a link again, but just so you know, that's a free PDF download of this little sampler quilt that I designed for this quilt along. And so let's start with the mushrooms. Okay, so with the cutting, of course, I already did the background. Let me pull this back in. So I'm using this background. This is my bee cross stitch in pewter, and it's the same one that I used for the quilt in the book. And I really like this very subtle neutral color, and so I just decided to use it for these blocks again. And I used a darker background because I want the bottom of the mushrooms to be, white or a light background color. And then I love how all the different colors show up on this bee cross stitch. And so that's what I went ahead and did. And let's see. And so I cut all of my backgrounds, at the same time. And then I just went ahead and cut 4.5-inch squares for the large stem, and then just a bunch of squares for the small stems in variety of prints, like in grades and stuff like this. This little print right here is a new background print for me. It's in the Hush Hush 2 collection that some of us Riley Blake designers got together and designed 1 print each. And so this is my contribution for that collection that's just out right now, the little baby chicks that I originally did in Calico days, and then I did this print again in different colors in Farm Girl Vintage, and then I'm bringing the print back again in Hush Hush 2, and then it's in different colors again for Calico coming in December. So yes, I really love that little baby chick print. And so I've already got a bunch of the bottoms cut for both sizes, and so I'm just going to talk about the tops and how I cut those out of my scrap baskets. And so for the tops, I'm not going to be sewing another one for the large one, but I do want to show you how I cut that and which basket size that I've used, that I've told you in the book that I use. So here's just one of my baskets right here. This is the 7-inch basket that I use. And so I need to cut a 6.5 by 8.5 piece. And so I'm just gonna grab one of these strips. And this is how I typically cut from my scrap basket. So I'm just gonna grab that. I'm gonna press it first. Now when I press, this is when I add moisture to my fabric. So this is what I use, half and half water, and the other half is spray starch. Mary Ellen's Best Press is what I use. And you could use 75-25 if you wanted. I just kind of like the half and half. So it gives it a little starch, but not a lot. I don't like my fabric real stiff because I like it to have, you know, some give to it. And so I use a vintage iron, as you know, and so those are dry irons. I don't have any steam in my irons or any moisture. So at the point when I'm cutting is when I add any water at all to my fabric, is right before I cut. Okay, and then that shrinks it down, because you know when you apply heat to 100% cotton that is wet, it's going to shrink it a little bit. And so then I just grab my ruler and I'm going to measure in 8.5 from here, and probably a little bit more than 8.5, then I can trim that off straight. And I'm just going to start on the bottom here. And because this is 7 and I need it 6.5 tall, it's just easy to just simply cut like that. And then go across the top here and cut. And then I'll go ahead, turn that around and put it exactly on the 8.5 inch line. Let me pull that in so I don't want to get too far away from the camera. Okay, so then I'm cut for one top right there. And it's nice, and you know, it's got a little bit of starch in it, but not too much. And then this is the rest of the strip. It's too large. I'm not going to go ahead and cut it down into squares or anything like that, because it's large enough to be able to do something else with. So I just simply fold it up and put it back into my 7-inch basket. Now, some of you may ask why I use 7-inch. I know I've told you this before, because 6.5 is more of a common, popular cut. But the reason I do 7 is because you can see there how easy it is just to cut it down to 6.5 inches tall. But because these are 7 inches tall, that means I can get 2 3.5 inch measurements. A lot of times, if I need 4 matching 3.5 inch squares, all I do is cut a 7-inch square from here and then subcut into 3.5 inch squares. And that's much easier than going through my 3.5 inch strip basket and trying to find a long strip of matching squares. It's just much easier. Just like when we use a 10-inch pre-cut, you know, then you can get 4 5-inch squares out of that, and out of the 5-inch squares you can get 4 2.5-inch squares. That's just simply what I'm doing with the 7-inch and 3.5 inch, because you know, they work out math-wise like that easier for me. And so I have just found that it's much easier to cut down to a 6.5 inch when I need to. The 7-inch is more usable to me. Okay, so I'm going to grab this other ruler. I'm going to cut a top for my small mushrooms, and this is just one of my 3.5 inch baskets. And so that's what I'm going to use for that. So I'm just going to grab the top here, go over here and press this. If you want to know about my vintage irons, I'll leave a link again, but I do have a video on my vintage irons and how I find them, how I use them, why I use them, and what to look for. And so this one is simple. It's very easy to cut because it's 3.5 inches tall by 4.5 inches wide. So that's super easy. I'm going to put that back in my basket, and I've got that cut, plus a few others by the machine, a couple of others that I already have cut. And so I think you're going to be surprised how fast these sew up. It's just a matter of lots of easy corner triangles, and so I'll meet you over there with Miss Dolly, and let's start sewing. Okay, here I am with Miss Dolly, like I said, and she's named after Dolly Parton. And I've got my large mushroom here, my small mushroom here. I've got 3 tops cut. And as you know, I usually like to work from the top down on picture blocks like this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how we do the tops. And so there are 2 different sizes of squares that you cut for the easy corner triangles. And so just grab the large size squares, and you're going to put 1 on each side of this top. And I'm just going to follow this center line right here, or you can mark a line from corner to corner, but what I like to do is just start sewing immediately, so I don't like to mark lines unless I have to. And I just start right there in the corner, and then I'm going to follow this center line along with this. So since these blocks are so simple, I thought it would be good to show you how I actually do sew instead of just 1 block at a time, like I'm usually chain piecing. I usually do 6 at a time, 3 to 6. So I'm just going to show you how I chain piece and just do the same step on all 3. And it's just much easier than stopping and starting like that. And how I do this is I'm just going to cut, and now I can do the other side. And of course we're going on the opposite angle. Just make sure they're lined up. And I usually just start by doing a few stitches right here in the beginning, just making sure that's right on the corner. And then I'll move this to where it needs to be here. Okay, and then I'll take this last one and put that triangle there. And then I'll go ahead and just run a scrap of fabric through so I can show you how I trim and press these. So with these, I just cut off an approximate 1/4 inch. Now when I'm cutting these off, I try not to do a lot less than 1/4 inch. I don't have to measure. You could use your rotary cutter if you want, but you just don't have to be that exact. They're already sewn. But I just find, especially when I'm going to be adding these little corners, that if you cut this seam too narrow, that's just more room for wiggle space here on the bias. And so I like to have a nice 1/4 inch seam just to give that stability. And then I bring these over here to the iron, and I'm going to set those seams, and then I'm just going to let the shape of the iron do the job of opening these up, meaning open them like that and then just go like that, because I don't want to really be going this way because I don't want to distort it. So then I'll just throw that on there, put that on there so you can see what the top of that looks like. And so I just want to make sure they're opened all the way, but I don't pull a whole bunch. I just kind of, again, let the shape of the iron do its job. Now these clappers are made out of a special wood that absorbs the heat, and so this allows these pieces with the heat of the iron to absorb the heat, and then once the heat is taken out, then because of the weight of this is on there, it's gonna lie flatter. So it's gonna, you know, cool off so that it's flatter. And I can feel that heat right there, so you know, I know that's worked. And so now I'm going to bring these over. Let me just grab these. Normally I'll probably keep that on a few, you know, a little bit longer, but, and start working on something else. But because I'm showing you how to make these blocks, I'm going to skip ahead. So here's these tiny ones. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to show you the small block is because I didn't want you guys to worry or get really nervous about these tiny little pieces. Yes, this is a tiny piece, but it doesn't matter. We don't have to worry about corner and seam allowances going all the way around it or anything like that. We're simply just putting it on the bottom corner here, and we're just curving this. See how much ends up showing anyway? It really doesn't, you know, show that much. So don't let these little pieces worry you. It does make a difference if you don't have them, then that's going to be really squared. So I liked the curved, you know, because a mushroom is curved. And so that's why I wanted to add these. But it doesn't matter how big or small your pieces are when you're doing easy corner triangles like this. Like this could be 2 inches square, 3 inches square. It doesn't matter. You're just going from corner to corner and just holding it here on the corner. So don't let that, you know, those small pieces make you nervous. And so we're just going to put on the bottom part of the top of the mushroom, just going to do the same thing. One on each corner. And the key to these are just to get those lined up and just try to hold it right on that corner there. And again, it's these, don't worry too much about this. It's just going to round your corner, and it doesn't have to be, you know, you're not going to measure it after and make sure it's like an exact, you know, 1/4 inch seam or anything like that, because that's not what we're doing here. We're just simply rounding the corners. Okay, so I'm going to use my scrap fabric. Someone asked me in my last week's video why I use this in tutorials. Again, I just use this during tutorials to save on thread, save on time, so I don't have all these threads out here that I'm trimming. But normally when I'm sewing blocks, oh, I forgot to do this other one. Normally when I'm sewing blocks, I am sewing actually bonus projects, like I'm sewing patches together in between, either triangles or squares or something like that, depending on, you know, the bonus project that I'm doing at the time. And then I'm kind of multitasking. And of course I explain that in all my Sew Your Stash series videos and things like that. So if you've watched me before, you understand. Okay, so here I go again. I don't want to trim this clear down. I want to give that stability by just, you know, trimming off and making sure I leave, you know, at least 1/4 inch there. We don't want to leave the whole thing on. I do want to trim it off. Okay, there we go. And then come back over here. Set the seams real quick. And again, I really don't want to distort these by ironing. I just kind of want to iron the least amount of time as I can. I'm going to, because I probably didn't leave that iron on long enough on the first one, so I'm probably going to use 2 clappers there. And just make sure that they're open, and that's all that you need to worry about that way. And just try not to overwork them. And again, even if they go a little bit wonky, it's just really not going to matter. Okay, I'm going to let them dry for just 1 minute and clean up these little scraps. And again, these are my trim offs that are so tiny, I'm not going to really do anything with those. I also have, a lot of you ask me why I don't just sew the 2 triangles together, say if these were big enough, and make half square triangles. Well, I can, and I have before. I used to do that all the time. But then I just end up with a whole bunch of different sizes of half square triangles that I always have to use in a quilt, and I found that limiting to, how do I explain that? I just found it kind of limiting to me to only have half square triangles to work with that were my sewn leftovers. It works much better for me, I found out over the years, to cut them into squares that are more usable, and I can use them in many different projects and have many different sizes of squares. And I use squares more than I just do half square triangle leftover quilts all the time. So, okay. These should be cool off enough to, now you can see that you've got a side right here, and in your background you've got a wide one and a narrow one, and it's the narrow sides that go on the top. So I'm just gonna run these through the machine here. And this is where I'm going to use my 1/4 inch seam allowance right here. I do not use a scant. I use it right on the line. And I've never, a lot of people like to sew with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that's fine. I just don't find it, you know, necessary for me. So I just try to do a regular 1/4. But if I had to err on the side of bigger than 1/4 inch or smaller, obviously I would go scant if I needed to. Okay. And sometimes, depending on the mood, even though I'm not trying to do a scant, I mean, you just never know. These are all, you know, done by hand, and we're just makers, right? And so our mood depends on how we sew differently sometimes. And it's kind of funny, we can sew the exact same blocks one day, and they may be a 1/4 inch smaller the next day, or, you know, whatever. It just depends on our mood. And I've sewn enough years that I've just kind of realized that. I'm gonna grab my readers sometimes, because I have to be far enough away from my machine. I'm usually really up close and personal, but I want you to be able to see this instead of my head in the way. So I want to be able to see what I'm doing there. And then I just play with these, run these through. And this is the last step for the tops. One more on that side. Now, I know that I told you last week that if I was, when we were talking about pressing seam allowances open or not, and I said if I was doing 6-inch blocks, I would for sure be pressing my seams open. Well, you know, there's always an exception to every rule, and if there really is even rules, and you're the boss of your own quilt. But because these are easy corner triangles and really no seams intercept with each other and don't matter, I don't press these open. I don't find it necessary. So what I'm doing here, I'm going to set that up here, is I'm just going to open that way. And I just want to make sure that they're completely open before I iron back and forth, so that I don't, like this. Notice I'm lifting up my iron and going like this. I'm doing it very prominently now so you can see, but I usually just lift it up just a little bit to make sure that when I'm ironing back and forth like this, that I'm not. So let me show you again. So since this is open, when I go like this, I'm just lifting on my iron because I don't want to go back and forth and press down and get a pleat in these. So that's another little ironing tip. Now I'm letting those tops cool. That's all there is to that top. And so I've got 3 bottoms here, and all that happens with the bottoms here is just these small squares down here to round those bottom corners. And so I'm just going to run these through. And yes, these are tiny, but tiny's cute. Tiny's cute. Don't let tiny scare you. It's just a little square that you just sew from corner to corner. So I think it'll be really fun to do up a bunch of these small ones and just make a mini quilt out of these. I mean, you could do a pillow too. Runner, you know, I'm always saying pillows, but I love pillows. You can never have too many pillows. And I like runners too. I like to put them over the back of chairs just as well as on tables. And in fact, that runner right here, see, I've got that runner from my Prim and Proper book that's on the back of my stitchy chair right there. So, you know, you don't have to just use runners for a table, even though I use them for tables a lot, and tables, coffee table, my kitchen table, everything like that. But I put them on the ends of beds, roll them up and put them in baskets. And runners, I think, are kind of satisfying. They're quicker than quilts sometimes. If you want to just do something and play with some blocks, you would just do a runner instead of an entire quilt. Okay. So again, now I'm just going to trim these, and I want to make sure that I do not trim off too much because I want to give that stability because they're so tiny and because they go in opposite corners. That's not always my rule of thumb. Sometimes I can trim a little bit smaller if I want to, depending on the block and if I think it's going to stretch. But because these go in opposite corners, I just want to make sure that, you know, they're stable. And again, this size right here is really where the shape of the iron can do its job. You just open them up and then open it like that with the point of the iron. Put that on there. And I'll try to remember to leave the link to my vintage iron. It's part of the one where I show you how to do the DIY ironing boards, how to cover your own ironing boards and ironing tables and things like that for retreat and for your sewing room with my decorator weight fabric. That's in the last half of that video. I talk about the irons. Okay, I'm just going to set these up here for a minute. And the next step that I'm going to work on is I'm going to put the bottom of this onto the bottom of these stems. So as you can see, these are really fast, those little blocks I showed you. I think I don't know, I didn't count them. They're like 15, around approximately 15, 16, something like that. And, you know, I sewed all those in a couple hours because I did chain stitching or clothesline stitching, whatever you want to call it. Keep looking for my pieces down on my design board because that's where I usually keep them. Okay, so this is the last piece here, and there's my little starter and stopper scrap. And again, I'm not going to press these seams open. This is a block that's very simple, and I don't find it necessary for that. I usually like to press open because it makes the block more accurate. Your seams lie flatter, and so therefore the block is accurate, and it's easier to sew segments together when they're open, I believe. And so, but for this one, where there's no seams like getting in the way of each other, then this is just fine. Okay, so then the last thing I need to do is sew the sides right here onto the bottom, you know, on the two sides of the bottom here. And then I'm going to sew the top, and you can see I'm going to press those seams towards the outside, and then I'm going to press towards the top. And so I'll be right back, and I'll have that finished, and I'll chat with you a little bit then. All right, so I've got two of these finished, and I thought before I sewed, these two halves together that I should probably just show you that this is what the bottom half looks like. This is the top half. And again, the large one is sewn exactly the same way. It's just, you know, larger size pieces. And then I'm just going to hold these together. I didn't talk about pinning this time. You can pin if you want to, but I don't. And I just like to line it up at the end here in the beginning and then make it work. But I wanted to show you, the reason I wanted to show you this is, see how right here this corner is a little bit short because it went a little bit wonky. I just know because this measures the same height as this, that as long as this is straight and this edge is lined up, that I fixed that in the sewing. I hope that makes sense. So that little discrepancy, if you want to call it, that little shortage right there on that corner is going to be made up for within the seam allowance, and you'll never see it. And that's what it was like on one of the other ones of these small mushrooms that I just did. And so that's why I wanted to show you that, you know, you'll never be able to see that, and it doesn't matter. See, there it was right there. And it's all square and straight and everything, and it's just little corners. And so I don't want you to think that that all has to be exact. As long as it's less than 1/4 of an inch, you know, that you can hide it within that seam. That's all you need to know. And, you know, if there's one thing I really want to let you know is there is no such thing as perfection. And if we hold ourselves to perfection in our quilt blocks and our quilting, then, you know, it's not going to be fun. And it's like, what's the point if it's not fun? I'd like to enjoy what I'm doing. And yeah, sometimes I do rip something out if I feel like it's not going to go into the quilt, but there's usually one way that you can fix it, or you find out just through experience what you need to fix, what you don't need to fix, what you need to let go, and, you know, what you need to just chalk up for, you know, it's good enough for who it's for, you know, type thing. Or as my grandmas and her sisters used to say, my great aunts, is if you can't see it while you're riding by on a galloping horse, then who cares, you know? And so that's the small blocks. And let's talk about this quilt a little bit. I never told you the finished size. So this is 60 by 72, but you can see that it's sewn together in strips here because I designed this block, and it's in my section, One Block Wonder, because you can see that I have the sashings built in. That's why I don't have a piece around here. See how there's background here, but there's no background up there? That's because two of them sewn next to each other, because these are 6-inch blocks. If you put those next to each other, then that lines up, and then this is the built-in sashing underneath the large mushroom. I can also put them on top, because even though there's not any sashing up there, this is the building sashing here. So see, that's how that works. So you can really, if you want to make this for a larger bed than a twin or something, you just keep going, just adding more blocks and adding more strips. So that's really simple. And when I go to put the small ones together to make a mini quilt, let's take this off. Let's put this one up here. And see, again, it's the same rule applies. It's got those built-in sashings there. So on the sides and on the top. So all I have to do for my mini quilt is I could offset them if I want to, but I kind of like them like that, straight across. So I can just add as many blocks as I want. You can make a pillow, a 9x9, for a fun idea. Also, you could cut a strip 1.5 by 6.5, and that would be the same height as this of the background, and put up there. If you was just using this for a singular block, it would be 6 inches wide by 7 inches tall, because that would add another inch to it. But wouldn't that be cute if you did little mini quilts like that and made them into bunting? Look how cute that would be, just hanging on a clothesline, all of these mushrooms. I can see that like in a child's bedroom with a woodland theme. You can do it in boyish colors if you wanted to, or something. I don't know. I just think that would be really cute in a little kid's room. or a baby's room or something like that. Maybe I'm thinking baby's room because, you know, Cassidy here, she only has 4 weeks left. So we're on the countdown for her little baby boy, and we're pretty excited about it. And so let's talk about next week. I will not be doing a tutorial next week. Let's look at the schedule here. I won't be doing a tutorial next week because next week is Chex Mix, and I've already done the Chex Mix tutorial, okay? And that's here on my channel. So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave a link in this video saying week 3 and a link to the tutorial. I've already done this for week 4, the crisscross star. The fat quarter flirt, I said we're going to do that at the very end because of the quilt label. And happy trails I have not done. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll be back for week 6 and I'll be doing a tutorial on happy trails, and I'll leave the link to the other 2. And so I hope you are enjoying this so long. It's going to be going for 32 weeks. So I think it's going to be kind of fun. It's totally doable because it's only one, in this instant, 2 blocks this week, but you can see how simple these blocks are, a large and a small. And so thank you so much for joining me. Please like this video, leave me a comment, and let me know any questions, and I'll try to answer them either in the comments or in the next video. And again, thanks for joining me and sewing with me in my sewing room, and I'll chat with you later.